The first sound is wrong, not wind, not birds. A low roar, like the earth breathing in. Then the water stands up. Dogs panic, children look to the elders. A wall of gray rises beyond the reeds and begins to move. Fires go out mid-breath. Footprints fill and vanish. By the time anyone understands, the sea is already inside the forest. This isn't a myth. Between Britain and the continent, a plain once fed thousands. Europe's drowned heartland. Was it erased in one apocalyptic day, or swallowed by centuries of tides? We follow the scars, seabed maps, DNA, tsunami sands, to the moment the land bridge failed. Go back to the last breath of the Ice Age. The glaciers retreat. Rivers wake and braid across a wide, low plain stretching from the Thames to the Dutch coast and out to a high shoal we now call the Doggerbank. It isn't a void on a map. It's wetlands flashing with fish, oak and pine on the heights, peat forming in quiet hollows. Red deer drift through willow thickets. Elk carve trails to the drowned valleys that will become the North Sea. People are here. Mesolithic families moving with the seasons. They cut reed for shelters and dry racks. They sew hides with bone needles. In the shallows they set fish weirs from wattle and steak. At night, campfire smoke carries the grease of eel and salmon. We don't have their words, but we have their work. Antler harpoons with barbs sharp enough to hold a thrashing pike, microlith blades, slotted into wooden shafts, paddles worn smooth by calloused hands. Fishermen found them by accident. Trawlers dragging nets over the Doggerbank kept bringing up more than cod. A mammoth's molar, a red deer skull with tines like a crown, worked flints, antler points, even peat balls still holding ancient pollen. Prehistory arrived wrapped in kelp and mud. That's how the first shape of this lost world surfaced, piece by piece, on decks slick with seawater. Then the map sharpened. Bathymetry traced old coastlines and contour lines in color. Seismic surveys lit up buried valleys, meander scars, and lake basins under the seafloor. We could see rivers that once connected what's now the English coast to the Netherlands and Denmark. Dendritic veins of fresh water feeding a landscape of marsh and meadow. The Doggerbank rose like a broad island in the middle, a perfect base for people who knew how to read tides. Micro-stories flicker through the evidence. A red ochre burial in a peat bog on a modern shore hints at ceremony that would have repeated out on the plain. A child's footprint impressed in ancient silt tells you exactly how small feet slipped when the mud held. A canoe later found preserved inland explains the routes that once crossed channels we can only map. You can trace a morning. A woman lifts a carry basket. A dog shakes off spray. A man checks a weir line. Ordinary life that never expected to be archived by the sea, but the water is coming. The climate pulse is relentless. As ice melts, the Atlantic rises centimeter by centimeter, season by season. Shorelines creep inland. Camps shift to fresher springs. A fish trap that worked for a grandfather sits high and dry for the grandson, then disappears entirely for the great-granddaughter. People adapt. They move upslope, then again. They watch headlands turn to islands, and islands to shoals. Stakes tighten. The plain that once joined Britain to the continent narrows into corridors. Herd paths pinch. Salmon runs change their timing. Flint sources on the Doggerbank draw more traffic, and with it, competition. Choices harden. Do you stay on the shrinking heights and ride the tides, or do you follow the river mouths toward the coast that will survive? Mobility keeps groups alive, but it stretches kin ties thin. A visit becomes a voyage. News travels by paddle, while families read the sky and stack driftwood against storms. Far to the north, something else is building. On the edge of Norway, a continental shelf loaded with loose glacial muds waits, quiet, heavy, primed. The plain below us is already drowning by inches. It's about to meet a sea that moves in meters. North of the drowning plain, the shelf off Norway holds a different story. Ice age mud stacked on a slope, saturated, unstable. For centuries it sits, a loaded spring pressed flat by the weight of glaciers, then loosened by their retreat. Gas pockets form, clay seams slick with water. The whole margin is quiet, but tense. We can map it now. A scar hundreds of kilometers long on the seafloor. That scar marks the moment the lock failed. Something lets go. Maybe a small quake. Maybe gas bursting from soft mud. The Storiga slide surges. Billions of tons of sediment lurch downslope in minutes, bulldozing the deep. Water above it is shoved aside, then yanked back. The sea doesn't slosh, it heaves. A pulse races outward, a wave train born from a collapsing margin. In deep water, the crest is low and fast. In the shallows of the North Sea basin, it grows teeth. We know the timing from radiocarbon dates in mud and peat around the basin, thousands of years before farming touches Britain. The wave arrives in sequences, not a single blow. First drawdown, channels emptying as if the tide ran backward, fish thrashing in exposed weirs. Then a wall returns. In Shetland, cores preserve marine sand thrown over peat like a thrown blanket. In eastern Scotland, shell fragments sit far inland, mixed with ripped plant fibers. In eastern England, a distinctive, clean sand sheet splits black peats, salt water in the wrong layer, peppered with diatoms from open sea. Translate that into lives. Dawn at a low camp. Nets drying. A dog pacing the margin. The estuary empties, faster than any spring ebb. The elder doesn't recognize the pattern because there's no pattern here, just speed. People step onto exposed mud to gather fish flapping in the shallows. The sound arrives late, a grinding hiss, then a roar that drowns speech. The wave rides the river like a spear. It lifts boats, snaps stakes, picks up driftwood, and turns it into clubs. A hearth goes dark under a sheet of salt water and sand. A child's basket drops mid-run, seeds spilling into the current. Dogs howl and vanish. What nobody knew then, the wave wasn't alone. Reflections off coasts and banks send second and third surges, each arriving with its own angle and height. The Dogger Bank bends them but can't stop them. Low flats become open water. Freshwater lakes flip brackish in hours. Salt burns roots. Reed beds lay flat. The afternoise is silence. No frogs, no birds. Just floating mats and debris lodged in tree crotches 2 body lengths high. Cores tell us the inland reach. In places, the sand sheet thins uphill to a feather edge, marking the limit of that day's intrusion. In valleys, the layer is thick, sharp, and clean. No time for mixing. It reads like a seismograph written in grains. And yet, even here, the story splits. Was this the day Doggerland died, or a blow that shattered what rising water was already unmaking? The stakes point both ways. Camps nearest the estuaries don't stand a chance. Elders, infants, dogs, stored food, gone in a single sequence of surges. Canoes smashed, winter fuel soaked with salt. But the people on higher knolls survive the first hours. They climb with whatever they can carry. The wave doesn't chase them into the next day. What it does is erase the habitability of the flats that fed them. Survivors look outward and see a new map. Channels widen, familiar crossings broken, resource networks severed at the joints. The cousin who lived 3 paddles downstream is now a sea away. People scatter toward any ground that still grows fresh grass. Some ride out on the Dogger Bank, the high island that was, for a time, a refuge. Others hug new coastlines, searching for unpoisoned water, rescuing weir stakes, retying their lives to surviving rivers. The impact isn't just immediate death. It's salt in the wells. It's fish runs shifted by torn channels. It's peat turned from fuel to stinking waste. It's stories broken mid-sentence because the burial place is gone. Knowledge fragments when kin groups lose each other. A child raised inland doesn't learn the tides of the old estuary. A boatmaker loses the cousin who wove the best waddle. Stress ratchets, arguments sharpen, rituals change because the old landmarks are underwater. Meanwhile, the sea keeps rising. After the waves withdraw, the drowned plane doesn't reappear. The sand sheet is a line in a book that keeps adding pages. Storms ride higher water into new ground. A fish trap rebuilt on a familiar channel now sits in a salt throat. People move. They rebuild. Then another surge, another season of loss. Doggerland doesn't die in an afternoon. It bleeds out over generations. So, did Starega end it? It made everything worse, fast. It turned a slow retreat into a crisis. It taught a living world what a wall of water feels like. But the executioner was relentless time and a sea that never stopped climbing. The wave was the shout. The drowning was the sentence. In the years after the waves, the horizon doesn't settle. The sea keeps climbing. Not fast enough to notice day by day, but cruel at the scale of a life. A boy's childhood headland is an island by his midlife. His daughter marries on a shore her grandparents never knew. Maps can't hold this. Stories try and fail and get revised again. We read the absence. On modern coasts at very low tide, forests appear. Black stumps locked in peat, roots still gripping soil they grew in when the shoreline stood miles farther out. Trackways cut through former marsh end abruptly at water, boards leading to nothing. In drowned bays, divers feel their way along old tree lines that aren't supposed to be there. The world that fed people isn't fully gone, it's displaced downward, buried under yards of silt and salt. People adjust by tightening their calendar and widening their routes. Canoes become constant companions. Footpaths that once crossed firm flats are replaced by water corridors threaded through reeds and new inlets. Camps compact onto higher ground that shrinks a little each year. You can hear the arithmetic at a council fire. How many hands to move the weirs? How many to dig a new spring? How far a child can walk before the tide turns? The logistics of survival replace the freedom of roaming. Trade flexes with the shore. The Dogger Bank, still high for a while, remains a magnet for flint. Napped blades and flakes travel along fresh routes that skirt new bays. Antler, umber, and shells move as tokens and tools, connecting groups who share fewer face-to-face seasons. The network doesn't vanish. It rewires toward the margins. The Atlantic facades of Britain and Ireland, the Baltic mouths, the Frisian flats. Knowledge rides with it. Which channels are safe? Which currents lie? Genetics adds a thread. Ancient DNA in Britain and around the North Sea holds clear Mesolithic ancestry. People didn't vanish. Land did. Lineages persist while shorelines redraw. Continuity lives in bone, in the enamel of teeth, in the shared shapes of barbed points. Change shows up in the toolkit. More fish traps, more paddles, more barbed antler points optimized not for elk alone, but for seal and big fish in rougher water. Dogs appear as partners under pressure. Scavengers turn guards, then companions on long paddles between camps. Memory shifts into warning. Oral traditions in later coastal cultures whisper hazards older than their languages. Tides that eat careless people. Spirits that live in capricious channels. Shores you visit with offerings and leave quickly. It isn't supernatural so much as instruction. Don't sleep on low ground. Watch the moon. Never turn your back on a drawn-down bay. A taboo can be a map you carry in your head when paper doesn't exist. The cost is intimate. Burial places sink beneath waves. Ritual routes fragment. Names attached to river bends lose their reference when the bend drowns. You can replace a weir. You can't replace the place you spoke to your ancestors. Grief becomes portable. People learn to mourn on new headlands while pointing to empty water and saying, "There, that's where they are." The last connection to Britain narrows into a dangerous thread. Crossings that once were walks become paddles timed to wind and tide. then risky open water sprints. Elders stay behind because the crossing steals breath and strength. Young adults become ferrymen and ferry mothers, choosing when to risk it. One bad wind shift, and the gap takes you. You can feel a culture pivot from land first to water first, then finally to coast first, as Britain pulls free. Eventually the thread snaps, not in one day, but in a series of failed crossings, missed meetings, abandoned camps. The isthmus becomes shoals. Shoals become hazards. Britain is an island. The plain is a memory with coordinates that no longer exist. What survives is scattered, bones trawled from banks, tools dredged with shell, a thin sand layer inside peat where fresh water should have held, and stories, shreds of them, about loss that comes as water, again and again. When a world drowns, people don't write history, they tell stories. Across northern Europe, you still hear traces, bells ringing underwater in storms, lowlands that shine at dusk as if fields wait just beneath the waves, ghostlands off Friesland and Norfolk, with names nobody can place on a modern map. Flood saints, sea witches, drowned churches. They sound like superstition. They read like memory. Atlantis isn't here. That tale is a Greek thought experiment about hubris and order, not a field report from the North Sea, but the pattern it dramatizes, an advanced place swallowed by rising water, echoes what Mesolithic families actually lived. Drowned kingdoms aren't proof of a single lost city. They're the cultural residue of coastlines that move faster than stories could keep pace. The evidence we do have is hard and layered. Seismic lines striped across the seafloor sketch river systems with the clarity of aerial photography only upside down in time. Bathymetric maps contour old shorelines and lake rims. Cores pulled from the banks read like stackable diaries. Peat, then clean sand with marine microfossils. Then peat again, each shift dated by radiocarbon and pinned to regional chronologies. On coasts, LiDAR cuts through hedges and housing to expose fossil estuaries and abandoned channels that point straight toward the drowned plain. It's a converging picture, multiple tools drawing the same lost landscape. Yet key questions sit just out of reach. How many people lived on that plain at any one time? We can estimate carrying capacity from habitat models, but not count tents. Did Storega cause mass mortality, or mostly displacement? Tsunami sands don't list names. Social structure leaves faint traces, site clusters, repeated tool types, shared material, but we can't read their kin systems from microliths alone. And the pace of the final separation. We can bracket it, but not set a single year when a last family realized the walk to Britain was over. The frontier is getting sharper. Ancient DNA in sediments, seeded DNA, pulls animal and plant signals out of cores that never held a bone. Microfossils reveal salinity shifts tide by tide. Underwater archaeology is moving from blind grabs to targeted survey with autonomous vehicles, ground-penetrating sonar tuned to find hearthstones and post holes beneath sand. The next decade could put us above a Mesolithic camp like a drone over a living village, except it's under 15 meters of water and 6,000 years of silt. Then comes the mirror. Modern deltas subside under their own weight. Coasts erode where storms bite deeper each year. The combination that undid Doggerland, rising water, plus one bad day, still stalks shorelines, from Louisiana to Bangladesh to the North Sea's own low countries. We tell ourselves our walls are higher, our warning systems better. They are. But water doesn't negotiate. The physics that erased a continent's heartland are still in session. So, what can't we prove? Plenty. What should we learn? That a map is temporary. That memory keeps people alive when charts fail. That a culture can pivot fast, but only if it can move together. The bells some swear they hear under certain winds might just be waves on wreckage, or they might be what we choose to hear, a reminder that land can vanish and leave only sound. A living world went quiet out there, not because it deserved to, but because the sea kept coming and didn't care. If this hit you, subscribe and turn on the bell. We tell the story's history buried for a reason. Drop the flood myths you grew up with in the comments. Then watch our next deep dive on the Bronze Age shoreline collapse, because the past isn't past when the water's rising.